Hello everyone, it's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and I'm here to review The Acid King, and this is a new documentary from director Dan Jones and focuses on the story of Ricky Kasso, an American teenager who murdered his friend Gary Lauwers in an alleged satanic sacrifice during the summer of 1984. And this film focuses on the broader perspective of this satanic panic that had been going on in the 1980s at the time, height of like Reagan America, and a lot of like that returning to conservative traditional ideals. And you know, they didn't like people that were edgy or different, and you had groups of young teenagers who would wear leather or denim vests and have like satanic print on them, or like Metallica shirts or AC/DC shirts or Black Sabbath, and automatically they were a satanic cult. And this documentary deals with that kind of perspective and that perception that occurred with young people at the time, and automatically it's like, because they listen to heavy metal, they must be evil. I must be evil. I have AC/DC shirts. And it's like, and that perspective was very real and poignant at the time. And there was this real, tangible satanic panic of like this fear that people were turning towards Satan, turning away from God. America is very much a Christian nation with so many people that are Christian. A lot less now than there were before, but it's still a big part of the political landscape, this religious perspectives and like traditional ideals. And this documentary looks at that broader perspective, but it also looks specifically at this situation, and they interview a lot of people from like the close area to gain perspective on Ricky Kasso and understanding who he was, and seeing like, were there signs of stuff like this? Was this something that people could have prevented? And really getting a understanding of more what happens when people drift away and lose connection, and what does society do about it, and do people help them pull them back, or are they lost to the brink? And this documentary really focuses on that story. In general, this is a pretty low budget documentary, but they do a really fine job in terms of the filmmaking and getting these interviews in here. And there's a mix of like really serious interviews, but there's definitely people who have like a sense of humor about it and kind of poking fun at that very rigid perspective on like, if you like metal music and wear black, it's like you're automatically worshiping Satan, because there's an absurdity to that. And this film doesn't shy away from shining a light onto that absurdity. And this film is very well structured and broader scope. It is long. Like, the cut that I saw was almost 2 hours, and from what I could tell from IMDb, it looks like there's a previous cut that was close to 2 hours and 20 minutes. There's a lot going on here. It could have been streamlined, and what's even more interesting is that they fill in a lot of the narrative-driven, like the narrative drive and gaps, by a lot of just text. They throw a lot of text at you on the screen, like it'll cut to black and it's just like, read text, and there's like 5 slides of text. And that kind of got on my nerves because, like, you know, film is a visual medium, and it felt like they were trying to maybe make up for the fact that maybe they didn't have a full perspective in terms of exactly where things were going. And like, generally you could see documentaries putting up like data or statistics, or like, you know, at the end of a documentary, like quick summarization of like, this is what happened afterwards. But this film really relies upon trying to write out a lot of things and put it right there for the audience to read it. And that took me out of the movie a bit. And especially with the length of this film, I think what was being shown and the story going on and the greater perspective in terms of themes and ideas were really compelling and interesting. And I think Jones does a really fine job of bringing them to light. I just felt like maybe how it was done might be a little clunky. But in the end, I felt like I learned a lot from this documentary and thought it was an interesting perspective on a time even, well, before I was born. I was born in the very, very early 90s. So this was a time before me, but it gives a really interesting perspective on what it was like being there in the 80s. And mostly, well, primarily just from people with this perspective, it wasn't really something they were going for, trying to show like religious and Christian people and like their perspectives. Like they show clips and stuff like that from like political committees and like hearings and stuff like that. But in general, this is a very interesting tearing down of like this perception of the Satanic Panic, and then looking at this very horrible situation and this death that didn't need to happen, and what could have been done to make things better and not lead up to this point. But those are my thoughts on The Acid King. Let me know what you think, and let's talk some movies. But thank you as always for tuning in and supporting your Wasteland reviewer.